All right, take that as a yes. All right. We're in the middle of Peskas Habatim, the third parak in Bava Basra. I wanted to skip ahead a little bit this week because next week is Tisha B'Av. So wanted to jump ahead to Daf Mem Chet in Peskas Habatim. Okay. I'm going to read from 5 lines from the bottom. Is that funny? I'm going to read from 5 lines from the bottom on Daf Mem Chet Amud Bet. Amar Rav Huna, Kal Yuhu B'Zavin Zvine Zvine. Okay, this is a very the reason why I chose this selection is because the Gemara has a discussion about a specific law and the laws of sales, and it branches off a little bit into various what we call Shas topics. And I thought it'd be interesting to glean a little bit from various topics that I would consider interesting. So Rafuna makes a statement and says that if you literally hang somebody up and you force him to sell you an item, so the item is sold to you, even if it's against the seller's will. So the Gemara says that if I literally force him by hanging him, by threatening him, by in a matter of force, even though apparently he would rather not sell it, nevertheless the sale is valid. So Gemara wants to know why. What's the reason? My timer. Kol de mazben inish, ilab de anis lo have mazben. So the Gemara makes a presumption that anytime a person has to sell something, the assumption is that if he had or she had their druthers, they would probably not want to sell that item. Okay, that's what's called everybody is a little bit forced at heart. Okay, vafilu hachi zvine zvine, and nevertheless, even though everybody sells things all day long and all night long, nevertheless, the sale goes through, even though they're a little bit intimidated from selling it because they don't really want to sell it. Okay, now why don't they want to sell it? So let's examine this statement a little bit. Okay, let's examine this statement a little bit. So let's see what the Rashbam says. The Rashbam says, 4 lines from the bottom, the kol de mazvin inish, rov chafatzim uklei beito v'talito she'ada mocher, ilav de onis v'dachik b'mos lo havi mazvin. The Gemara is saying something a little bit on a philosophical sense that people tend not to want to sell their possessions. And this statement is actually carries through. If you've been around the Talmud, you would know that when it comes to, for example, real estate, right? The Gemara in several places says a person never ever should sell real estate. Okay, you shouldn't, and unless you're a trader by trade and you sell things all day long, and your profit comes from the vig that you get, right? The difference that you get from what you pay for it and what you sell it for, and that 10% markup is your profit, then obviously that's what you do for a living. But if you're selling something, you really shouldn't be selling it because everything should be left at status quo. The Gemara says that about real estate. And in truth, the Gemara says that about a lot of things. If you remember, I believe it was in the middle of the first parak of Kiddushin, I think around Daf Yudches Yutes, where it says Kiyamu Chachicha, right? You're poor and you have to sell. And the Gemara says, well, you don't really want to sell, but you have to sell because you have no choice. So a person tends to sell their items only out of real desperation. So that's when it comes to selling items. I saw a very interesting quote from someone who died not too long ago, regarding investments. Okay, because there's various schools of thought about how to deal and how you should sell, or if you should sell the stocks that you buy. So I saw actually a very interesting quote in the words of Charlie Munger, who's known as the partner of Warren Buffett, recently died. He said, "You don't make money when you buy, and you don't make money when you sell. You make money when you wait." Now that's obviously, that line is groomed for someone like him who was a long-term investor for 90 years. So obviously, when you do the math and figure out, and they've shown this in studies, that selling and buying and selling and back and forth, you're better off leaving your money. Again, I'm talking about, this is just regarding investments per se, right? You leave your money in the market, and over time, you'll make more than if you are very, very quick on the trigger and buy and sell and buy and sell. So that's obviously in the world of investing. But the Gemara says it's not only true with that, it's true with pretty much everything else. Keeping things status quo, you're much better off. And the only reason what would possess you to sell is because you absolutely have no choice and need the cash. And that's exactly what the Rashbam is explaining over here, the insight and the psychology behind why is it that every sale is a little bit of a forced sale, right? A garage sale. Why is a person emptying his garage and selling all his junk, right? Because you need the money. Okay, if you want to get rid of it, then throw it out. So every single thing that you sell, again, that's not specifically business related, right? If you're an Amazon retailer, obviously all day and all night, you're buying and selling, That's a different kind. This is something that you own, right? That you would rather not sell if all things being equal. So the Gemara wants to make that leap between a person who has to sell what he owns and is a little bit forced to someone who actually has a gun to his head, right? To which Rav Huna says, "Tal you have zavin zvine," that it's a good sale. Okay, so the Gemara says that's too much of a stretch, meaning I can't prove Rav Huna's rule that a forced sale is good, because the truth is, Dilma Shani unsa denafshe unsa dachrine. How could you compare a personal, a personal onus, meaning I need money because I need food for my house, so therefore I'm going to sell something, and I don't have a gun to it. I'm not forced. I'm selling it to survive. That shouldn't be compared to someone who has a gun to his head and says, "Sell me this field or I'll shoot you." Right? That's a real onus. That's, the first case, okay, I have 100% intent that I'm going to sell this, and the Kenyan should be chal. How do you compare that to someone who has a gun to their head? So the Gemara is going to go on a next try of where we're going to prove this source of Rav Huna that a forced sale is good. So I wanted to analyze this a little bit because there's a discussion we had not too long ago. We had this Gemara back in Daf Yomiville in January, I believe, at the end of the 6th parak in Bava Kama. Okay, the Gemara at the end of the 6th parak in Bava Kama on Daf Samach Beis Amar Aleph, all the way in the bottom, says Amar le Rav Ada Brei de Rav Avia le Rav Ashi Ma bein Gazlan lachamsa. What is the difference between a Gazlan and a Chamsan? Okay, and Tosas explains that we're on a Durabanan level. Okay, meaning the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, when it lists the people who are pasal edus, gives examples of Gazlanim and Chamsanim. A Chamsan is someone who extorts. A Gazlan is someone who steals. So what is the real difference between a Gazlan and a Chamsan? So the Gemara says, Amar le Chamsan yahiv demei, Gazlan lo yahiv demei. A Chamsan at least is nice enough. He may extort it out of you, i.e., he may make you sell it to you, right? Even if you're not really interested in selling it. he will hold you up, but at least at the end of the day, he'll pay you for it. A Gazlan will not pay you for it. Okay? So that is the first attempt to answer. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Amarle iyahiv dami. So Rav Ashi says, that's true. Iyahiv demech. Hamsin karisle. Wait a second. A guy actually gave you the money. Yeah, you didn't want to sell it, granted. Are you telling me, though, that I'm called a chamsin, I'm pasal edus, even though I paid you every dollar that you asked for it? Doesn't sound right. And what's the proof that a forced sale is good? Because of our Gemara that we just learned a few minutes ago. Right? A forced sale is good. So why should someone be called a chamsun and be pasal edus if the fact of the matter is that he paid for it? Right? Why should he be pasal edus? A forced sale is good, according to the Gemara in Bava Basra. Gemara says, no, lo kasha. Had amarotzani, had the lo amarotzani. So here's where the plot thickens. Meaning, a chamsen will pay, but what does the buyer say? What does the seller say? The seller has to say rotzani. He has to inevitably mouth the words, I accept the sale. Okay? A chamsen, he may pay, but the seller still doesn't want to sell it to him. So therefore, he doesn't say rotzani. And Tosfos in Bava Kam on the bottom says, chamsen yahav demei. A chamsen pays money, ukshlo amarotzani kedim farish. And Gemara is going to, in conclusion, say, yeah, he's a chamsen, he pays, but the seller really never has in his mind that this sale is going to go through. He really doesn't want it to go through. Therefore, he doesn't say rotzani. Says Tosfos, Alvamin HaTorah. So again, remember how we start off by saying this is all on a durabanan. But according to the Torah, enu pasol, the truth is, you're right. It can't make sense any other way. Midoraisa, you're only pasol edus if you literally rob it from someone and you don't pay him the money. But if you at least pay for it, you're kasher le'edus afalgav delo amarotzan. Even though the mocher never said the magic words rotzani, and here's a big but. Afal pi, meaning you're kasher le'edus, because you paid for it. Unfortunately, the owner never said rotzani, and there's one detail left. What's the last detail? Afal pisha over alab delo tachma. We're forgetting about that. The sale's going to go through, even though this chamson was over on Mosach. Because what did this person do? He extorted it, and he obviously was jealous. That's why he wanted it so much that he justified extorting it from the seller by throwing him the money. So you're over lo sachmod, ha'aminu perak shtaynochen, but even though you're over lo sachmod, we say in Bava Metzia, lo sachmod le'inshe b'lo demi mashma. We spoke about this way back in the beginning of Bava Metzia about 6 months ago. That says that what? That says that lo sachmod, to most people, the way they understand it is when you don't pay for something. Whereas when you take it illegally, you can't resist, and you take it and you fall for it, and that's it. You shoplift, you get out. That's when lo sachmod is. But if I take something and I pay for it, how in the world am I over lo sachmod? So the truth is you are over, but 9 out of 10 people don't believe it. And this is the one rare case, I think, that the Gemara says that because most people can't understand that fact, we bend the rules a little bit. So that's why you're still over here lo sachmod, because you paid for it. Okay. So that's the discussion over here between the difference between a Gazlan and a Chamsin. So our Gemara in Bava Basra said the sale is good because he said rotzani. However, if you didn't say rotzani, it's a big discussion in the Rishonim whether or not the sale. We're not going to discuss it, but just to let you know, it's a major machlokas, the Ravid and the whatever gets into a whole big tumult over here whether the seller actually has to say the words rotzani, but it's clear from this Gemara in, or at least from this Tosas in Bava Kama, that says that you are considered a chamson. And the big chiddush that he throws in is even though there's an avera. So we're not going to talk about this topic, but there is a lot to talk about on the following sentence, which is, why should the sale go through if a sin was committed? We have a concept in Tumura called Milsadama Rahman Aloavid, Izlavid Mahani Olo Mahani, which basically means if I do something that the Torah says not to do and I do it anyway, does it work? Right? The big example is like if you shecht on Shabbos. If you shecht on Shabbos, it's a horrible thing, right? You're chayav skila. But the question is the meat kosher? So it's a machlokas, Abaya and Rava, whether or not the meat is kosher, meaning whether the shrita is good or not. There's two things going on at the same time. Do we separate the fact that the shechita was 100% kosher? Unfortunately, it was done on Shabbos when the act of shechita is prohibited, but don't take it out on the meat because the meat did nothing wrong. It was a 100% black kosher shechita. Or do you say that the Torah penalizes you and says because you broke the rule and you committed a sin, we're not going to let the result of this sin be fruitful, and therefore this shechita we won't permit. That is a very, very huge discussion. We're not going to talk about it, but you should at least know that maybe one day when we get to Tamura in 2.5 years or so, maybe we'll talk about it then. But the big thing that comes out of here is that Tosfos lights up the board with this concept of, even though the owner didn't say rotzani, right? He's still over on lo sachmod. Now we spoke about lo sachmod a few months ago, like we mentioned in the beginning of Bava Metzia, and I think just as a refresher, I think one of the mandatory, like we have the Ani Mamins that we say every day, the Yud Gimel Karim. I think there's a few things on a list like that a person should say every single day, and that's the Ibn Ezer that we saw in Parshas Yisro. Okay, we said it a few months ago. I'm going to say it again because you could never get too much of this Ibn Ezer. The Ibn Ezer in Parshas Yisro asks the question, which everybody asks, which is Anashim Rabim Yitmahu Al Zos HaMitzvah. When it says Lo Sachmo, everybody asks, everybody wonders, how could you have such a prohibition in the Ten Commandments, right? Number 10. You see something beautiful, you walk past an art gallery, you see a beautiful painting, and you say, wow, I wish that was in my dining room. That is the way we were programmed, that's the way we were born, and you can't fight it. So what is so bad about this? I'll give you a mashal again. Sorry for repeating this from a few months ago, but like I said, this should be on everyone's refrigerator, assuming it's not wood paneled. Da ki ish kafri sheyesh lo das nachona v'hu ra bas melech shehi yafa. Right, a person, a villager out in the middle of nowhere, right? One day sees the king's daughter, who's beautiful. She comes to town one day, right? Lo yachmur asal belivo sheyishkav. He has absolutely not 1 ounce of a cheshek for her because she is so unattainable, right? It's not even as they say in the parsha. She's so out of it for him. It's right. It's like we can't relate to Bill Gates and Richard Branson and Steve Jobs. These are people who are not everyday people, and it's so not practical to be jealous of them because they're on a completely different scale than what we speak to people on an everyday basis. He says, "Kiyada kizelo yitachen." This is impossible. Getting back to the Bas Melech. Right? Don't think that this person is like one of these crazy people. like people who are jealous, that they want to be like a bird that has wings. He says it's impossible, just like a person may think his mother is a good-looking woman, but you'll never have a case where a person wants to sleep with his own mother. It's absolutely on a different plane than where than we deal with it. It's taught from 5 years old that she's usher to him. So there's nothing to talk about, right? Kacha kol maskil tzarach sheyeda ki isha yafa o mamun lo yimtze'enu adam ba'avur chachmaso v'dato. Right? So to every maskil, every reasonable person has to know that this beautiful woman or this windfall or this money that you see other people have is not going to come to you because you're smart. Rak ha'asher chelek lo Hashem. If it was your destiny, you will get it. If it's not destiny, then you won't get it. Now, we're not going to talk about hishtadlus now because everybody likes to say, well, then why should I get out of bed in the morning? Right? This leads, unfortunately, to many, many discussions. But in a nutshell, what the Ibn Ezra is trying to say is that you should absolutely do your, as they say, your hishtadlus, but don't dream about things that are way, 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 that are beyond our capabilities, that are 100% unattainable. So, being that Atosis and Bava Kama discussed Lo Sachmod, I thought that was a absolute necessity to review the Ibn Ezer on Lo Sachmod. So the sale, getting back to our sale that was done, okay, this person, right, according to Tosfos and Bava Kama, remember what Bava Kama said? Tosfos said that this sale goes through even though a sin was committed. Now, what sin is this? So if you look in, not in the Sefer HaChinuch, usually we do that. Today we are going to look at, the Rambam. We're going to look at the Rambam in Mitzvah 266. Okay, Mitzvah 266. The Rambam says, "He's harinu mehesi machshavatenu lachmod ma sheyesh laachenu ulis avos bo shezei yihya mavol lasot hachbula liknoso." We're prohibited from putting our thoughts into being jealous to other Jews and to desire something that is not ours. Bezel lashon hazhara bazeh ha'inyan amru lo titaveh beis reyech. Right, if you remember in Yisro, it says Lo Sachmod, and in the Eschanan, coming up in a couple of weeks, it changes to Lo Titaveh, Beit Reyecha. Ve'ein shnei lavim elu b'inyan echad. And the reason why the Torah switched the word is because there's two different things going on. Alav harishon hu lo sachmod, mazil liknos ma sheyesh l'zulatenu. The first of Lo Sachmod is answering us acquiring of what doesn't belong to us, something that someone else's, where he says the second one in Veschanan, okay, and here's the punchline, he says, V'lav sheni mazir afil hisavos bil ve'enu levad. The second one, where it says lo tisaveh, is prohibiting even only to desire it. Okay? The first one is what we call lemaisa, going and, like our example of throwing money at someone and forcing him to sell it. There you did a maisa. But the Rambam says lo tisave is something in our hearts. Okay? It's even desiring something but not acting on it. Okay? Very, very important distinction. Okay? That's what the Rambam says in his Sefer HaMitzvos 266. And he quotes the Mechilta that says, yes, there's two separate prohibitions. One is thinking about it and wanting it, and the second one is actually doing a maisa and attaining it. It says over there in the Mechilta that how do you know that if you just want something, you're going to end up acting on that on that feeling. Okay, so he goes on and on. Okay. Okay, so we'll stop over there because I wanted to show you the Rambam in his Mishnah Torah in Hilchas Gzela. Okay, so it's interesting. We said that this is something that we think it's a feeling, but he actually puts it amongst the laws of Hilchas Gzela ve'Aveda in the first chapter. He says, "Kol mitaveh beito o ishto v'kelo shel chavero." If you desire, right, someone's house, someone's wife, someone's car, v'chen kol yotze v'hen mishar dvarim shefel nosim mimenu, right, something that is possible for him to buy for himself. If he actually thought in his head, and if he starts thinking about it too much, how can I get this? And he becomes very, very anxious and his heart is aroused, right? So that gets him, right, to feel a certain way. He's over mishum lo tisaveh. Ve'ein taiva ela belev bilvad. Right? This is what we just said a minute ago. And this taiva is all internalized. He didn't physically do anything yet. It's all inside. Hataiva mevia lidei chimud, v'achimud mevi lidei gezel. So the Rambam says something that we all could understand, right? The first thing you do wrong is to think about it. Once you start thinking about it, you wait long enough and you start hatching a plan, and that's the end of that. That brings you to gezel. Because if the owner doesn't want to sell it to you, even you said, I'll give you all the money that you want, and you go and you offer him so much money and you get your friends involved, not a good idea, right? Yavo lidei gezel. It's all going to end up in gezel. Shenemer v'chamdu batim. Quotes a pasuk in Micha v'imamdu habayim b'fanav lahatzel mono menam l'gzel yavo de'shilchas damim. Wow! And if you want to take this one step further, because if the owner, the mocher, says, "Man, this guy is really desperate. I'm gonna watch my card because who knows what this guy could do." Right? He's gonna save his property. He's gonna do whatever he can to save his objects. Right? Who knows? This can, right? This can prevent, right, this person from his desire to steal. Who knows that this guy may even end up killing him one day, right? We had that concept by the Hababa Machteret, if you remember the Gemara in Sanhedrin that talked about, the person always would give up himself for his property. That's why the Torah says, "Habala hargacha hashkem b'harga," right? The person coming into your house at night. Different topic, but that's what we see from the Rambam. So, what is our conclusion about saying Rotzani regarding Talyu Avizavin? So, we have a couple of opinions in the Rishonim that the one opinion says that you don't really have to say Rotzan, right? We're quoting from the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef in the Shulchan Aruch says that the you don't have to say the words Rotzani. The Mocha doesn't have to say Rotzani, but if you just were silent and you accepted the money, it's as though you said Rotzani. Why? Because accepting money is tantamount to saying, okay, here it is, even though if you don't say the magic words Rotzani. Right? That's what we call Shamaisev Mochichin, Shehurotzev Mekach. The seller is content with selling it, even though he doesn't say Rotzani. So that's good. That's the opinion of the Beis Yosef. And there's one other opinion, which is the Nesivus. The Nesivus says, Sheyesh l'chalik ben makom she'ansuha ba'onas haguf or ba'onas mammon. The Nesivus says, well, it depends. Talyu havizavin, does that mean that he was literally forced, like with bodily injury? Or was it called anus mammon? If you don't sell this to me, I'm going to burn your house down. right? Because as soon as this seller got his money, he could breathe a sigh of relief, right? Therefore, he doesn't have to say rotzani. Because even if he didn't say rotzani, then obviously it's still what we call an umdana, right? We could see umdana demucha kushagomer b'dayta umakne. Okay, that he still wants to go ahead with this acquisition. Okay, so those are two opinions we see in the Rishonim. I wanted to just bring up a related Gemara because we all know probably top three famous Agadatas in all of Shas. One of them is in Shabbos Daf Peches. Okay, whenever you talk about this concept of forcing someone, we have to remember the Gemara in Shabbos Peches that says, "Vayisyatzu betachtis hahar." By Kabbalah Torah, the Jews were ready to accept the Torah. It says they were betachtis hahar. Amar Ravadimi bar Chama bar Chasim lamet shekaf HaKadosh Baruch Hu lehem sahar kegigis. V'amar lehem imatem mekablim haTorah muta v'imav sham tiyeh kuvuratchem. So this is a very, very famous Gemara, as we mentioned, and the Gemara says that we were forced to take the. Let's just read it in its simplest explanation first. So Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov Mikan Moda Rabba Loraisa. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, this sounds funny. You're telling me that we were forced? This is like a big, big caveat for the future. We have a way out. Anytime we're ever held to judgment to say, how come you didn't keep the Torah? Our answer could be, right, this is a moda, right? Like we had moda a few days ago in the daf, right? A forced sale, right? If you write a shtar that says that the sale that I'm about to do, I don't really mean it. I'm doing it because I have no choice, because the guy's going to kill me and my family. So I attest to you today that whatever happens at the end of the week doesn't really mean anything, right? We had that already 2 days ago. That's called a shtar moda, right? This is the biggest moda. This is a moda. This cancels everything because we were coerced, right? Rashi says, She'im yazminam ladin, lama lo kiyamtem. If at the end of Me'eva Esrim, right, we get asked, no, how come you didn't do anything in your life? Because we were forced to. So the Gemara says, yeah, you may have been forced then, but later on, Afal Piken says Rava Hadur Kabul Chashverosh. Okay, so there's an answer to the question. But the question, still a good question, which is what? This is a major problem because we were forced to. So now that we know the principle that if you're forced to do something, it still counts. What's the Gemara's question? Big deal that we were forced to. When it comes to selling something, if you sell something under pressure, the sale is still good. So all the Achronim, there's about 10 answers to this. I only want to look at a couple of them. But again, the assumption of the question is that we're comparing, right? Is that we're comparing an Agadata about God giving us the Torah to a law regarding selling objects on a day-to-day basis. So you could obviously see that, that's not such a good comparison, because at the end of the day, this is an Agadata. It has to do with God and the Torah, and we don't really know what it means literally. But if you assume that the question is still a question, let's answer the Kehilas Yaakov has one answer. He says, "She'ein omrim shemitoch onso gomer bedatu mischayev ela bedavar she'eino mischayev bo olamit." What's the difference between Kabbalah Torah and this person selling his tractor to someone? Torah is forever, right? The person who forces you to sell him your tractor is not something what we call olamit. So therefore, okay, the sale could go through. Aval hecha shemischayev ba'ol tamidi. Torah is something that we constantly have to accept, right? Every single day we make a birchas Torah. Torah is all the time is ubiquitous. So therefore, it's something called tamidi, Enu gomer b'daito hamischayev, right? Therefore, I may not accept this. Okay, you forced me to sell you a tractor one day, I'll give in to you, even though I didn't really want to sell it. Great. But Torah, how do you compare selling your tractor to someone to accepting the Torah by force, right? That's something that I have to deal with every single day. So therefore, that might be called a modah. That might be called a real block to this transaction, and something under duress I shouldn't be responsible for, right? Now, even though the mountain was on top of us, and we basically had no choice, it's perpetual. You can't say that because of the onus, you said, okay, I'll accept it. No. You can't accept something that is what the Kilas Yaakov says is Tamidi. That's one way to look at the question. There's another way to answer that question I saw in the Shilas Uchuvos of the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer asked this question, and he says, I'm reading from the Shilas Uchuvos Chassam Sofer from Orach Chaim. I don't know exactly how he got onto this, but he says, excuse me, it's our B'Shabbos Perek Yakiv Mikam Odah Rabba Lo. Right? So Lama Lo Neima Kivin Shekafa Har Kegigis V'Tashash Koch Yitzram. He talks about the Rambam that we're going to see in a minute, that everybody really is never forced, because when it comes down to it, the right, like they say, the Pintele Yid in us really wants to do good things. So even if we sound like we're giving everyone a hard time, we're really good at heart. You just have to dig a little deep. Right? We're going to see that Rambam very soon, hopefully. But he's talking about that Rambam over here. He says, we had no choice. The mountain was on top of us, right? Our Yetzer was diminished. To call divrei harambam hainu achar shekvar kibalnu haTorah. Right. He's asking the question. Hold on a second. Right, a modah rabba. Right, I tell you of his oven. Right, it's still good. So why does the Gemara ask? Who cares if we were coerced? I'll tell you why. Because this was before Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, we didn't have Torah yet. Right? When do we give people the benefit of the doubt that there's really an ounce of good in everyone? And even if they don't want to give a get, as we're going to see, they really do want to give it because it's the right thing to do. That's only after Shekvar Kibalnu HaTorah. So then you could say, well, when the Rambam says that he really wants to do good, but he's got the little devil on his right shoulder who's telling him to do the wrong thing, that's only after Kabbalah Satorah, right? But in the Gemara and Shabbos, that was before Kabbalah Satorah. It's not Shayach. Therefore, Rava says, stop the press. We got a big problem. You're telling me the Jewish people were forced? So that's a great way of the Chassam Sofer explaining that the Gemara's question or Rava's statement is in fact a good statement, and you can't ask from Talyu Bezalel because it's before Matan Torah, or you can't ask from the Rambam because the Rambam's Pintele Yid little pshetel doesn't fit in, because we didn't have this good feeling in all of us. And if you were being forced, no, then unfortunately it wouldn't work. So that's also a very interesting way that the Chassam Sofer explains that. So getting back to our Gemara, remember why we bought this? I don't. So let's remind ourselves how we got into this. We wanted to find a reason. Why is it that a forced sale, according to Rav Huna, goes through? It's not because people sell things all the time, even though they really, if they had their druthers, would really not sell, because that's not a good comparison. Ella, the Gemara says, I'm on Mem Zayin Amud. I'm sorry, I'm on Mem Ches Amud Beis on the bottom. Um, I'm sorry, Mem Zayin Amud Beis on the bottom last line. Ella Likiditanya. I'll tell you what the reason is. Yakrivo, so because we're going to learn from a korban. The pasuk says in the beginning of Yikra Yakrivo to, Malamit Shekofino, so that we force a person to bring what? We force a person to bring a korban as per his vow. Person makes a neder to bring a korban. If he doesn't want to bring it, we force him physically. The Gemara says, Yachol bar Koko. I might think that we go to him and we handcuff him and we threaten him and we beat him up. Talmud Lomer Lirtzona. No, we don't do that. We let him do it in his own volition. So this sounds like an oxymoron. What do you mean? How could you force someone to do something voluntarily? That's an inherent contradiction. It isn't in Judaism. We force him until in the end, the torture pays off. And after all the torture, for 1 minute, he says, okay, I'll do it. So if you block that 1 minute of him saying, I will do it, then we have a case of someone doing it under his own volition. Okay? So that's the Gemara. Okay, period. So therefore, maybe we should extend that rule to the person, or in our case, in Bava Basra, selling his tractor. I threaten him and he sells it to me. It's good. Why? Because kafiyah, because sometimes forcing works. So let's bring a raya from Karbanos that kafiyah works. There's nothing wrong with forcing. The Gemara says, no. What are you talking about? How could you answer that? How could you compare a korban to our case of Talyu of Bezalel, of this person selling his tractor to someone against his will? The person by the korban who made a neder, deep down, knows that this korban is for his own good. Nichalel kapara, he wants a kapara. So that's why. How could you compare that to the case of a forced sale? There's no kapara over there. So that's at least what the Gemara answers. I want to look at this for a minute, because whenever we quote a pasuk, we always know we go right to the source, and we're going to look at this pasuk. The pasuk is in the beginning of Vayikra. The pasuk says, Adam kiakrim korban, right? Im ola karbano min habakar zachar tabim yakrivenu petach ol mod yakrivo tol ritzono lifnei Hashem. So if you look in Rashi, in the very, very beginning of Parshas Vayikra, Rashi says, our Gemara, which is what? Yakrivo to kofinus ochi omerotzani. What's interesting, and we always have Ibn Ezer's. Ibn Ezer, known as the biggest Pashtan, he will say exactly what it means. Ibn Ezer says 4 words. It's almost like he's respectively disagreeing with Rashi. He says, Lirtzano ifnei Hashem, sheyakrivenu beratzon, v'lo ba'ones. He has to do it willingly, not by coercion, not by force. So it seems, at least, that he doesn't buy all of these drashas. So I don't know if he's exactly arguing on it, but he's saying that it really has to be done from his own volition without forcing. Our way is giving like almost a Shmei Dre way of, well, in the end, he does it willingly. Yeah, if you put a gun to a guy's head, see, that's why this is a little bit confusing, because how do you define willingly? Everyone does everything willingly at the end, right? If you torture someone enough, in the end, he'll tell you willingly, but was it really willingly? That's why this is a little complicated, which is why we need help. Well, before we get to that, I saw another Chassam Sofer, because how do we deal with this contradiction? Meaning, it has to be ratzo and it can't be forced. So Rashi says there's a hybrid answer. There's a very beautiful Chassam Sofer that it's very long. I'll try to summarize it. He basically says, "V'yesh lomer hakra ustiras hadikdukin kach hena." He says, I'm going to try to answer how we have this internal contradiction about forcing somebody to bring a korban willingly. Again, it sounds like a mammoth oxymoron, right? How do you force someone to do something willingly? It's like a riddle. So the way the Chassam Sofer explains, he has a whole long explanation over here. What he basically says is that he discusses that what we're talking about over. We're talking about a person who made a neder, and he has to bring a korban. So presumably this person lives outside of Yerushalayim. He's someone that chances are is a working person. His world is filled with Gashmias, and he's never been to Yerushalayim. It's interesting. The Chassam Sofer has a whole buildup of what, it's almost like an ukimta, of what this, I really recommend you reading this. It's the third pasuk, it's the Chassam Sofer in the third pasuk in Vayikra. He has a whole buildup as to who this person is that's bringing a korban. So he says it's a person who's full of gashmias. He has no ruchnius in him. He doesn't learn. He doesn't understand anything. All he knows is that he's mechayev a korban. So he goes to Yerushalayim, and he goes, and like for the first time in his life, he sees the city, and he sees people. He sees Torah. He sees the Beis HaMikdash. He sees the Kohanim and the Leviim, and he's like inspired, right? Well, this is almost like a storybook. He said, I'm just going to say a little bit over here. He says, and he's wanting to bring this, and he goes over to the Heichal, and he says, and he says, he says it's his korban is going to be b'simcha rak ad shemagia shama he says it's a hybrid, it's a mix. In the beginning, it starts off as force because he doesn't really want to bring it, but once he sees what's going on in the Beis HaMikdash, his eyes are opened. Shmuel, you would really love this Chassam Sofer if you've never saw it. He says because this whole person's life was living in a kvar. The whole inyana v'askov rak begashmias. His whole life is gashmias. V'lo ra'a davar mikol hanyanim ha'elim miyomo. He never saw it. Misham yavio so bal korcho kemuchachu ka'onus. Aval kasher yavo al hakodesh penima v'yera kol ela rigshos kodesh bo az yase hakol mirtzono. All of a sudden, like the switch is flicked on, is the switch is turned on, and it's all done from ratzon hatov v'yahava. V'zeh el pesach o el moed hainu el pesach o el moed yakriv so aval irtzono kasher hu ba. So there's a combination of some of it is yakrivoso, and some of it is birtzono. Very, very beautiful Chassam Sofer. I had to just speed it up a little bit. Okay, so that's the section on karbanos. So the Gemara is still looking for a reason as to why is it, again, Talyu of Bezavin, Zvine Zvine. Why is it that a forced sale goes through? Let's try to Vela Mesefa. The Gemara on Memches, 5th line says, well, let's try to learn it from the get. Well, if it works by a man who has to give his wife a get, now why does a man have to give his wife a get? The Rashbam explains, we're talking about the Mishnah in Ksuvas that says there's a list of men who are listed that have to give their wives a get. For whatever reason, there's something wrong with them. They have a mum, they're mukashchin, they're bad husbands, they did bad things. So bad people must give their wives a get. And if they don't, Bezdin beats them up. Okay, that's what the Mishnah said. Whoa. So it sounds like forcing accomplishes something. So maybe let's draw the same conclusion, getting back to our law about forcing the guy to sell you the tractor. So the Gemara says, no, Dilma Shani Hasam de mitzvah l'shmua divrei chachamim. Nah, you know why it works in the get? Because it's a mitzvah to listen to the Rabbanan, to the Bezdin. So as we're going to see the Rambam now, we can't have this class without looking at the second chapter in the Rambam, Hilchas Gerushin, one of the top famous Rambams in all of Yad HaChazaka. He says, that a person was forced, compelled by Bezdin, okay, because he qualified as one of those people who are on the list that have to give a get, okay, and he didn't want to. Bezdin shel Yisrael b'chol makom calls on makana, so we beat him up until he says rotzani v'yichtav haget who get kasher. The keni mikahu akum, okay, the non-Jews beat him up. V'amalo asa masha Yisrael omer lo v'lachatzu oso Yisrael bi'ad akum achigar shor is a kasher. It's a get kasher. V'ma akum ha'atzmo and so okay. V'lama lo bitel get zeh shaharehu anus. Hold on a second. The Rambam says forcing someone doesn't work. It doesn't count. So why is it when it comes to a get it counts? He doesn't understand, says the Rambam. She'ein omrim onus ela misha nilchatz v'nidchak lasos davar she'einu mechuyev bo min haTorah. We say onus doesn't count when someone is asked to do something that he doesn't have to do biblically. You beat someone up until they give it to you. No. But in our case, someone who's good, the only problem is his Yetzer Hara is telling him, don't give the get, don't give the get. That's called Yitzra Takfo, right? This is what we call the self-imposed anus. He's a good guy. His Yetzer is getting to him. This person really deep down wants to be Makayim the mitzvos, but his Yetzer is getting to him. When they beat him up so much, so you're going to say, yeah, they beat him up because he can't breathe anymore. So of course he's going to give it. But no, they beat him up so much until his Yetzer gave in, and he says, Rotzani, Kvar Gerish Lertzano. That's considered Ratzon. It's considered willingly. Again, very, very difficult. A lot of interpretations on this. That's in a nutshell what the Rambam says. And this, by the way, the Maggid Mishnah says the source of where the Rambam got this Pintel Yid speech from, that deep down we're good people, is from our Gemara in Bava Basra, mitzvah lishmo divrei chachamim. Deep down, this person says, they're telling me to give a get. I'm going to have to swallow my pride and say, you know what, they probably know what's better for me. As I'm getting beaten the hell out of, these people know what's better for me. So therefore, mitzvah lishmo divrei chachamim, that, says the Maggid Mishnah, is exactly where we get the source of this Rambam that we just saw. And in the words of the Aruch HaShulchan says something very similar. He says, the Yesh Bazeh She'ela, he goes on and explains the Rambam, Eichu Ratzon, V'masha Omer Rotzani. It's an oxymoron, V'halal Kofin also. V'hadar Havale Onus V'atshuva Zakas of a Rambam, reading from the Aruch HaShulchan and Even HaEzer 134. She'ein Omer Anus El Misha Nilchatz V'nidchak Lasos Davar She'einu Mechuyev Bo Min HaTorah. Go on Misha Huka Ad Shemach Rot Shenasa Misha Takfo. Okay, he says, does he say anything else? No. He says exactly what we just said. So in conclusion, right, we'd love to know in conclusion, right? The Gemara ends off by saying, well, why does Tal Yehuva's oven work? We can't learn it out from a person selling his stuff every day, because that's a different kind of onus. We can't learn it from a karbanos. We can't learn it from gittin. And the only way to say it is, the Gemara says, Svaruhu, agav unse gamaru makne. 4 words. Well, because I have no other choice, I'm going to give in, which is like a little bit anticlimactic, because we'd figure after learning all these great topics and sugyas, right? With all these various sidetracks that we took, the bottom line is that what? Well, because of the onus, because I have no other alternative, I might as well accept this kinyan. And the Rashbam says that, you know what really does it? I'm going to read the words of the Rashbam. Dimitoch Ella Ravuna misvara didekam. Ravuna has a svar. You know what a svar is? I'm reading from the Rashbam. Dimitoch Yisurin Gamar Beliba Umakne. Because what are Yisurin? Physical. This seller is physically getting assaulted. So he says, you know what? I might as well sell it. Right? I want to live to see another day. I want to see my kids grow up. I'm not going to take one for the team. I'll sell him my tractor. Great. So you have one thing going for you. You have Yisurin. And says the Rashbam, Ho v'ika tarte Yisurin umaton mos the lo mafsid midi. He's getting beaten up and he's making money out of it. So that's a win-win, right? By accepting the sale, he stops the pain and there's nothing wrong with a little bit of profit. So based on that, the Gemara says that that's what seals the deal. Okay, so there is a discussion, obviously, because in the Rashbam itself, whether you actually need one thing, right? The Rashbam says that you need two items. So we all know that, what about if you only have one item? What if it's not physical torture? What if he just hung you on a tree upside down, right? What if he's not beating you up? So we showed him go into that. But the words of the Meiri, I'm going to end off by the words of the Meiri. The Meiri says that it's really the accepting of the money that seals the deal. The Meiri says, "Shenetinat hamos goreres es halev lihios kamer makne." He says, what does every transaction end off by getting money? Once you get money, then that kind of seals the deal. And the Mashmadas Ramban and the Ran and all the Rishonim seem to agree that that it's really, as we all know, that it's the money. Just a couple of other things I found interesting while we have a couple of minutes left that work with force. I saw a Shulchan Aruch. Ready for this one? I'm reading from the Even Ezer, the very, very first siman in the Even Ezer. Siman Aleph. Mitzvah al kol adam sheyisa isha ben yurchet. Okay. It's a chiyuv on every man that they should marry a woman when they are 18. V'hamakdim lisa ben yud gimel mitzvah men hamufcha. Okay. And if you do it if you get married at age 13, this is excellent. Okay, 13 is where we draw the line. Anything below that is nus. But if 20 years go by, right, and he didn't take a wife, he's over 20. Okay, if 20 years go by and either he hasn't gotten married, or he doesn't want to get married, so Bezdin forces the person, the commentators say, assuming the woman agrees, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of pruvu. Okay, there's enough time to talk about this. There's a lot of commentators on this. Okay, this is one example of what we call kafiyah, forcing. Then there's forcing also when it comes to tzedakah. Remember we had back in Bava Basra, I think on Daf Tes, where we had a story about someone forced to give tzedakah, right? Remember? So here's the Rambam, believe it or not. The Rambam in Hilchas Matnas Aniyim, chapter 7, Misha Eina Rotza Litan Tzedakah, if a person does not want to give tzedakah, or if he's cheap, okay, and he wants to give less than what's appropriate for him, Bezin kofinoso, Bezin forces him, umakanoso makas mardus, and they give him makas mardus, ad sheyiten masha amduhu liten, Right? And we take possessions. It's not like, okay, we'll send you a bill in the mail and hopefully you'll send a check. No, they go and they go with a court officer and they start taking his stuff. Okay, we had this concept a few times. And when it comes to tzedakah, we take a mashkon. You say, oh yeah, you don't have money to give tzedakah? Look at that Picasso hanging in your dining room. And they go and they take his Picasso with $50,000 and they lock it up as collateral. Okay? Even on Erev Shabbos. So, well, we ran out of time now, but we see other examples of kafiyah, of Bezdin forcing. Any questions?